All right, aloha and welcome everybody to our 12th episode of Forest Fridays. Thank you for registering and joining us. Today we have a really awesome panel of conservationists. So to introduce myself, my name is Haylin Chock. I'm the outreach specialist of Kauaʻi Invasive Species Committee. Today I will be assisted by Kim Rogers. She also works for Kauaʻi Invasive Species Committee, and Julia Diegman of the Kauai Forest Bird Recovery Project. So today we're going to be covering the topic of what does the future hold for our forests? And in order to illustrate that and share some stories, we have a great panel of guests. So Julia, as we go through, could we spotlight our guests, please? So today we have Katie Castle, who has had many years working with KRCP or Kokei. What is that? Yeah. Kim. So we have Katie Castle. We also have Leiwan of National Tropical Botanical Gardens, Limahuli, Randy Umetsu as well. We also have Bregan Klein of Division of Forestry and Wildlife, and Kyle Kagimoto. So welcome everybody. We're going to be going through this great program. Please share your questions in the chat. And we're also going to have a moment at the end of each pairing to answer some questions. So save your questions for then. And we'll also have time at the end for any questions. So just to check, Kim, are we good on Facebook streaming? And Julia as well?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So tonight we are going to be starting our panel with Katie Castle. Katie, let me just move this. Katie Castle established the Kokei Resource Conservation Program on Kauai. It is a volunteer-based program to help control invasive species in Kokei State Park. She also has worked many years controlling species like Myconia, and she is an overall amazing plant enthusiast. She has also written a book about the plants of Kokei. And there she is, Napua o Kokei. So if you stop by the Kokei museum, you can get a copy as well when next time you go up and hang out in the mountains. There's lots of beautiful pictures of our native plants. Thank you, Katie. So to start off our panel, my first question for you is going to be, after your many years of working in the native forests as well as with invasive species, what kind of started you on your path to starting KRCP?
Well, in the 1990s, I worked at the Kokei Museum, and they had a volunteer hike guide training series that was wonderful. One week there'd be a botanist, one week entomologist, and so on. And the last week was always a service project led by Wayne Souza, who was head of state parks at the time. And he would take us out into the forest and have us pulling weeds because he saw that the weeds were taking over the forest. This was not long after Hurricane Iniki. So without the canopy, the weeds are really getting going. So anyway, I saw that everyone really enjoyed this work and being in the forest with like-minded people and learning about all these magnificent ecosystems here in Hawaii that are unique in the world. And it appeared to me that it would be valuable to have a program where locals and visitors would be able to give back and learn firsthand what's happening in the forest and do this kind of thing. Plus, I grew up on a dairy farm, and my dad had us kids out there weeding the 50-acre fields from when we were 5 years old. So weeding a whole forest was not daunting to me. Anyway, so I took a grant writing workshop, got my first grant from Annie Sinclair Knutson Fund for $10,000, and me and my car, we started KRCP. And the amazing thing was how fast it grew, because pretty soon funding came in from several other organizations. At that time, there was no KISC. There was only the ISCs on the other islands. And they had $60,000 for KISC, but they gave it to me because KISC didn't exist yet. And that's how we got started doing the Myconia and the Longthorn Kiavi and some of their targets and so on. And so, and then the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service started funding us because invasive species are #1 priority on their endangered species recovery plans. And then Nature Conservancy, they're so wonderful. They wrote the watershed management plan, and then they hired us to do weeding in their areas of their, in the watershed plan. And then DLNR started funding us to weed inside their fences and so on. So, and we've had all donated cars in 24 years. We never had to buy a vehicle. We had donations from Fish and Wildlife Service. We had KIUC has donated several, and Nature Conservancy donated us cars. So anyway, that's been amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing work that you guys have been able to do up in Kokei. I know that you've led many volunteer days there, and since you've started it, KRCP has grown to have multiple employees as well as taken interns, which I know have impacted a lot of people's lives. Do you have any projects or memorable achievements in your time with KRCP that you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, one thing I was going to say about how this program grew so fast, the message is that if you see something that needs done and you have a passion to do it, just start doing it and the money will come. So anyway, I guess one of the memorable things really has been the success of the volunteer and internship programs. We've been a host site for Kupu, and many former interns are now employed in conservation jobs across the state. And it's a great way to start a career in conservation because our program gives hands-on experience and so on. And so anyway, also we providing visitors a chance to give back and help preserve the beauty that they came here to see. That's important for the tourism issue these days. I think they're talking about having that be a regular thing in the general public. And also very memorable was the work we did with Mr. David Boynton at the Kokei Discovery Center. He had every 5th grader class come up there for years, and they always did a service project. So it was amazing how many kids were influenced to care for the forest by David Boynton. That was always wonderful.
Yeah, I can attest to that myself. I remember, I think I was one of the last classes to go on a trip with Mr. Boynton, and I remember him taking us on Berry Flats, and
oh yeah,
here I am in conservation. So
yeah.
I'm very grateful for the work that you've done, and as well as Mr. Boynton for inspiring the next generation of conservationists.
Yeah, and I don't know how much time I have.
We got a couple more minutes, but I just wanted to end on one more question, and I wanted to ask you, considering you've worked in Kokei for many years, how have you seen the Kokei ecosystem change since when you started to now?
Well, we found we had to, Chipper Wickman told me to, obviously you're not going to weed all of Kokei and so on. We had to focus on areas that were still pretty native and they, and so on. We call them special ecological areas. So then we just focus on those, and those, you know, we kind of can keep up with them. But basically, I don't know, the weeds are winning in a lot of the other areas. But I've certainly been blessed with awesome and wonderful staff, especially now with Cherith and Spencer and Matt keeping the program going since I've retired. You know, that's been amazing. And
yeah, that was thank you for all of the work that you did, and like you started KRCP, which I can only see it growing, and you know, keeping up the good efforts up in Kokei and trying to keep those weeds at bay, especially our major invasive species like Kahili ginger, or otherwise known as Himalayan ginger, you know, and various sedges that are getting into the alakai. So we really thank you for all of the work that you've done over the years about educating not only the people of Kauai, but also tourists that come here. And you've also given so many opportunities to young local people to get into conservation and to work in a beautiful place like Kokei. So thank you so much for your time and your work that you've put into our special places, Katie.
Thanks so much, all of you, for keeping things going.
Yeah, so if you folks have any questions about KRCP or questions for Katie, you can drop it in the chat and we'll revisit that later. But for now, just to keep with time, we're going to be moving on to our next pair. All right, so Julia, if you could take a moment to highlight our next duo, or trio, actually. So we're gonna be having Lei Wan of Limahuli Garden Preserve, as well as Randy Umetsu and Cassie Jensen. All right, mahalo everybody for being here. Thank you so much. So just a quick intro for everybody. This is Lei Wan. She is the director of Limahuli Garden Preserve. She has ancestral ties to Limahuli and has a passion and care for Ha'ena. She's created a deep connection that shines strongly in her leadership. I can attest to that as I worked there for a short couple of months. So I miss you guys. Thank you. And Lei Wan, she went to school at the University of Waikato, UH Hilo, as well as UH Manoa with degrees in anthropology, Pacific Island studies, and elementary education. Thank you, Lei. And then we also have Randy Umetsu here. So Randy started working at Limahuli in 2018 as a horticulture specialist, where he stewards the collection of native Hawaiian plants and canoe plants. After college, Randy originally worked in Japan as a coordinator for international relations at a government office, but not being able to endure yet another year of office life, Randy returned home to Hawaii in 2015 to find a career that would both fulfill him and give back to Kauai. So aloha, Randy. And finally, our special guest, thank you, Cassie, for making it with us. So Cassandra Jensen is a 2-year Kupu intern who served 2 terms with Limahuli Garden Preserve. This last term, she served her Kupu term at Limahuli Upper Preserve. Super cool job. And today happens to be her last day. So thank you so much for making time for us, Cassie. And she will be going on to continue her work at Limahuli Garden Preserve while doing her master's. Katie has a strong interest in bryophytes and hopes to focus on bryophytes while completing her master's at UH Manoa. So mahalo everybody for coming. Let's see, so let me just pull up some questions. So starting with Lei, I know that you were an educator for a long time, and then you've recently switched over to this position. So my question for you would be, why is native plant conservation so important to you? I know you have a lot of pilina between the plants that are in the forest as well as those in the sea. So now after years of being an educator, what do you see your role as being the director of Limahuli now?
Oh boy, that's a big question. And break it apart one by one. So I'll kind of start with why what native plants are important to me. Native plants are our link through our kupuna. They're the botanical link of in essence of our kupuna. They are kupuna. There are connections to the past and the present. They're our connection to the future in terms of how we exist on this planet. They're old, and there's a reverence to them, just as we have for our elders here in physical forms and human forms. They're also our link in preserving our ecology and our environments. They're a huge part of the biodiversity of our forests and our ecosystems here in Hawaii. And so they are so important, whether they be plants on land or plants in the sea. We can't forget about those plants in the sea, our limu, that make up such a big part of the oxygen that we breathe every day.
Mahalo, mahalo.
So I think the second part of your question, kind of why why come back to our conservation after so many years in education. As many of you know, as an educator with the immersion school systems for a number of years and a number of Hawaiian educational nonprofits. But I actually started my career in conservation. For those of you who were around some 20-something years ago, I was a young intern through the first pipes internship, and that quickly made my career jump into managing native plant nurseries, and somewhere along the way, I had my son, and I took a break from conservation. I spent a lot of time climbing lolu trees, and enjoyed climbing lolu trees in the back of Lumaha'i and Wainiha Valley, and kind of figured it wasn't a good idea while being pregnant. And so I took a break from conservation and was in education for a long time. And I got swallowed up in immersion education for a number of years. And it was our community that asked me to come back and return to conservation. And when this position for the director position opened up here at Limahuli, it was my community that kept pushing me. And to a point, I almost couldn't put my phone down at times. They just kept saying, it's time to come home. Lei, will you apply? You come back to conservation, you think about it. And I did. I came home to fulfill the needs of our community. And I'm so happy I did. The work we do in conservation is so fulfilling, and every day is filled with so much gratitude. So
Mahalo, that is such a beautiful story. And you know, something that people in my family say is like, when Kuleana calls, you sometimes can't ignore it, and sometimes it's a physical call, it's an actual call. You can't ignore it. So we're very happy to see you back in your ancestral lands and continuing education, even though it's not in an institution or a school, but you're continuing education every day. So mahalo for the role that you fill and the lives that you touch every day at Limahuli. And moving on to Randy. So I know that you've had years of experience with Kupu, as well as learning about different ways to propagate plants. So since your time at Limahuli, what's the thing that keeps drawing you back to continue the work that you do?
I will get to that question, but I also wanted to give a shout out to Katie Castle as well, because not only did I get my start in conservation through the National Tropical Botanical Garden, but my first experience doing actual field work was with the internship through the Kokei Resource Conservation Program. And through that internship, I mean, I talk about it still to this day with people that I meet, and other interns that come to the garden, about the field work that I did up in Kokei with her. So that had a very big impact on what I do today, and that also inspires me to work with native plants. So the things that keep me coming back and inspires my love of native plants is kind of goes back to when I was working in Japan. It was a career pathway that I didn't feel was quite appropriate for me, and of course I was missing home. So I really wanted to do something that both fulfilled me, and then also gives back to the Kauai community that raised me. And what better way than to grow a literal piece of what makes Hawaii. And I had originally gone into more of an agricultural focus, but then I met people growing native plants, and man, native plant people are really into their native plants. And when people are so excited to talk about this plant that they saw in this valley, and then you start growing them from seeds. It's like, oh, can we get these things to grow from cuttings? I don't know, we gotta try it. And all of those things together, it's like, well, if everybody else is excited about it, then I should be really excited about it too. And that's exactly what happened. So that the challenge that I get to face, challenges in a good sense of the word, working in the garden, plants, I mean, you plant them, they do just stay there, but then they don't stay there. You have to like keep working with them, and then in the case of our kalo collection, we have to harvest them and we have to move them around, and there's all these different things that come into work every day, that challenges me to learn more about native plants, to learn more about our culturally important plants, and it doesn't feel like a job. I mean, it is. I wake up every morning and I'm not a morning person, but I never dreaded like actually going to work and putting my hands in the soil. It's yeah, it makes it really easy when you're doing something that you want to be doing. And then to Lei, she gives us the leeway to challenge ourselves, and take on different projects, and that allows us to explore the things that we want to explore, especially within the garden setting, because Limahuli Garden is also a botanical garden, so we have different features in the garden, and she gives us the opportunity to be like, okay, well, we want to see this part of the garden grow in a certain way. To highlight one example, we just did an outplanting of about 50 or so Olona, the Tuchardia latifolia species. And we have a portion of the garden we put a lot of work into clearing invasive trees, and now we've got some Olona in the ground, we got some Ava in the ground to kind of do a Hawaiian agroforestry kind of system. And those are all the things that really excite me, and that's why I keep coming back to it.
Amazing. Yes, that sounds awesome. And it seems to be the theme that with conservation is that people who are in conservation and plants, it's really something that we love to do, and we love the plants and we love being in our places, so mahalo for sharing that. I know that you also had experience with Kupu. So could you tell us a little bit about what drew you to Kupu, and how was your experience being an intern, as well as going back to be a cohort leader?
Kupu, I kind of just fell into my Kupu position because I had started off at the NTBG nursery, and the nursery manager at the time said, well, once you're done with your student internship, which is the timing works out really well because you'll first do your internship with KRCP, and then you can roll right into an internship at the nursery. So I kind of fell into that. But the program itself, I think a lot of people in Hawaii, especially people, yeah, I think the program really started in like 2005-ish, 2008-ish. From that point on, it's, if you want a real good into conservation, Kupu was the way to go. And I had a really great mentor that allowed me to work with a lot of different organizations, I guess, within the Kupu network, which is, I guess, almost all of the conservation organizations on the island. And the great part about that was you get to count your service hours as long as it's approved by your supervisor for your term. So I got to work with several different organizations and really get to see how different organizations do things, and do some networking. We all know that the conservation world is pretty small in Hawaii. So the more people that you can meet, especially if you are really into plants and you work really hard, that can be a great way to get a career down the line. I know Kyle has worked with basically everybody, and everybody has only good things to say about you. So yeah, that's my experience with the program, and all of the leaders that I've met through Kupu. They're really about raising the next generation of people to go into the field of conservation, and I think that is so awesome. We never even had that, or I never even heard of that when I was in high school. So to see it now is just awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's glad to see how the connections between different organizations, it connects everybody on the island. For years, like you could have an internship for a couple months at one organization and then have a career at another one, but everyone's interconnected, just as all of our plants in our forests are interconnected. So mahalo, Randy, for sharing that with us. And we're going to move on to our next guest, Cassandra or Cassie Jensen. So mahalo for joining us, Cassie. So I know that you've also served as a Kupu intern as well, and now you're going to be going on to your master's. So could you share a little bit about your experience with Kupu? What brought you to it? Were you always interested in conservation?
Sure. So I'm hoping to get my master's. We'll see in the future. But Kupu is sort of another thing that I fell into. I had a friend who was like, "Oh, you're interested in plants. You should look into this." And it turned out to be probably the best thing I've ever done for myself. And I got really lucky where I was placed with being at Limahuli. It's really cool to learn about plants, and it's really fun to go out in the field. But the people that I've come across at Limahuli and just conservation on Kauai, like as a whole, has been sort of the best part. I've had a lot of support through the people at Limahuli and within Kupu, just to, dig into what I'm interested in and find resources to help me learn more, or just be there to support me. And everyone here is so connected to each other. And like what Randy was saying, the island's small, conservation's even smaller. You get to know everyone, and people at Limahuli have been so great with, kind of letting me explore all the different routes across the island and anything that's possible. I mean, like in my introduction, I'm interested in bryophytes, and everyone has been so great about just letting me explore that deeper and being supportive and taking an interest in it, whether or not they're truly interested. I think that falling into it is probably, falling into Kupu has been pretty life-changing for me.
Awesome. Mahalo for joining us. And for those of you that don't know, or you've only gone to Limahuli for the lower gardens, Limahuli Preserve actually goes all the way up to the mountains. So that's where Cassie works. So Cassie, could you share a little bit about what it's been like to work in the upper preserve?
Sure. So it's a bit different. I did a full year in the lower preserve, which is sort of like music dry to wet forest. And the upper preserve is very steep terrain, very wet forest, cloud forest. We're up there protecting a seabird colony, just doing predator control and like invasive species removal of like ginger. And it's really hard work. We work 1 week on, 1 week off. We have to fly up there. And it's some of the hardest but best field work I've done. It's mostly just a lot of walking around and like looking for ginger and looking at things. But you're climbing ropes. This last week I walked the entire fence line, which was like really difficult climbing, just 45-degree slopes, sometimes even steeper than that. But again, I have a really great crew and a really great support system that every step of the way, they're teaching me everything that they know, and having these big conservation talks with me and you know, telling me about conservation in a realistic but optimistic way.
Great. Mahalo for joining us and for doing all the work that you do from all the way up in the mountains to everybody down in the lower gardens. And just to keep on schedule, I just wanted to mahalo again our group from Limahuli, and we will be circling back at the end for a round robin question. So to move on to our next pair, we have Kyle Kagimoto from the NARS program, as well as Bregan Klein from DOFA. So we will be spotlighting them. And we also have Matthew Derry, who's joined us. So let's bring them all together. Okay. Aloha, everybody. So welcome. So to introduce Kyle, so we have Kyle Kagimoto from the Division Forestry of Wildlife under the Native Ecosystems Protection Management Program. He was born and raised on Kauai and attended Hilo as he worked in conservation for 17 years. So prior jobs were with Hawksbill Turtle Recovery Project based out of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park and the Nature Conservancy Kauai program and Kupu. We also have Bregan Klein. So Bregan is currently a watershed field assistant for Division of Forestry and Wildlife, and she moved to Kauai in 2020 to participate in Kupu's Conservation Leadership Development Program. And one of her favorite things to do in the field is admire ohia trees and take out invasive species, because Bregan actually also used to work with KISC on our ROD team. So another interconnected moment between the organizations. So welcome, Bregan and Kyle.
Hi. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so my first question is going to be for Kyle. So you have had experience in all kinds of projects with DOFA and with various other organizations, and now you've moved on to NARS. So what started you on this path to conservation, and how has it led you to the position you're in now?
Yeah, aloha everyone. Thank you, Haylin, for the introduction and for the opportunity. Hopefully I can say something worthwhile for you guys. But yeah, as far as my story, so yeah, I was born and raised here in Kauai. I grew up in Kalaheo, went to Kauai High School. You know, like most people who grew up over here, especially in the pre-iPad days, you know, spent a lot of time just in the backyard, bass fishing in the local reservoir, camping on the beach, camping in Kokei for Boy Scouts. So, you know, I always had that love for the outdoors and the love for Kauai. But also, like most people who grew up on Kauai, you know, we don't really know the native species here. I used to love watching the show Nature on PBS, for those of you who are familiar. But, you know, so I probably knew more about the species in the African savanna than I did about the native species here on Kauai, you know, even though they're so incredible. But yeah, so I went to college, I went to Colorado, and I come from a family of engineers. So I started studying engineering. It quickly was not the right thing for me. So I transferred to Hilo. And as I was thinking about what to study, you know, just reflecting on the things that I enjoy doing, yeah, it kind of came back to just being outside and that love for the plants and animals. And so I started studying biology. My grades went way up, and yeah, everything was going good. But I gotta say, you know, I really didn't have any idea what I was gonna do after college. I was just enjoying that college life. But really what made all the difference, really the reason why I'm here today and have had this career in conservation is because one person came to our college class and gave a presentation on the sea turtles, the hawksbill turtles. It was just a little 10-minute presentation at the end of class, and he was recruiting summer volunteers. I didn't have any plans for the summer, and working at a national park was something good I could tell my parents. They would be happy. And you know, the job wasn't too bad. It was basically camping at the beach, snorkeling, eating coconuts, and then at night we'd look for sea turtles. But that experience really opened my eyes, because being based at the national park at the resource management division, I got to see that people are making a career out of doing the things that they love, whether it's sea turtles or native plants or birds, or studying the volcano. And there's a whole group of people, and they have they get to do what most other people just do on the weekends. So I finished on my college, graduated, and then still Larry, he had a passion for getting young local people involved in conservation, and giving them opportunities. So even though I was very not qualified for the job, there was an opening to coordinate that sea turtle project. And just based on the fact that I was a young local person, even if there's people who probably were very surprised that I got the job, he still gave it to me. But yeah, thanks to him, and him just kind of taking that chance and having trust in me, that has led me to where I am today. And so definitely owe him a lot of props. And yeah, it's been a great, it's been close to 17 years, and I've gotten to work in all sorts of amazing places, like the screen behind me, which is the top of the island, looking at Waialeale and Kauai. But yeah, it really all comes down to just Larry, or whoever, this mentor, giving people a chance and helping to develop them. So yeah.
Yeah, mahalo. It seems like you started your conservation career from the ocean now up to the forest. So you worked your whole way through the watershed up.
I preferred the camping at the beach, but I do also love the camping in the pouring rain.
Yeah. Mahalo for sharing that with us, Kyle, especially about sharing how it kind of takes a moment where you have a really impactful either internship or somebody who kind of takes you under their wing, and malamas you in that kind of way. And I think that's what's beautiful about the conservation community, is that no matter where you start, we're all interconnected and we all work with each other with the common goal of taking care of our environment. So yeah, mahalo for sharing that. And then we're going to be moving on to Breegan. So thanks for joining us, Breegan. You are probably the newest to the conservation world, considering you started in Kupu in 2020. And since then, you've worked with KISC on our ROD team, and now you work for DOFA. So I know you started this career path pretty recently, and you've moved here from the continental US, and you have connections to places like the Teton mountain range. So how did your connection to places closer to home translate when you moved to this tiny island that is a completely different ecosystem? So how has your love for those landscapes translated to the work you do now?
Thank you, Haylin, also for the intro and for having me. I am fairly new to the conservation community here, and I'm just so grateful for the experiences and opportunities and support that mentors like Kyle have given me. And to your question, I think I'll just kind of start with my conservation experience. Graduating from DePaul University in the pandemic, there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity for, early on conservationist roles. And I think jobs in general during that time, or if you're trying to get into conservation, it can be a really difficult thing to do without experience. And so I was just on a whim applying for Kupu, and like the guys at Limahuli talked about, it kind of fell into my lap. And I think my love for the outdoors and for nature and the environment never faltered from that. And my connection to the Tetons or to other places on the mainland, what's different about those compared to Hawaii is on Kauai, there's almost every different ecosystem you can think of, from being on the top of the island where it's extremely, wet forest, to on the west side, it's like a desert, and east side is like a rainforest. So it's just been an amazing experience being able to look at all those different landscapes and have an understanding of what's native, what's not, and what needs to be done. I think that it's just been an incredible experience being here because I'm able to see all those different things, whereas on the mainland, there's not nearly as much biodiversity as there is in Hawaii. And so I think that's what stands out most to me when I think about the difference between the two. But place is still important, really, wherever you go, and learning the place and how you can be of service to it.
Amazing. Yes, thank you for coming here and, choosing a career that gives back to the island. I think a follow-up question for that would be, do you see yourself growing in this position, or do you plan to stay in conservation since you started?
Yes, I think that I'll definitely stay in conservation. And just to touch on it more, like I definitely came and visited growing up to Kauai as a tourist with my family, and I think moving here for the role in conservation has felt really impactful because I've wanted to for so long give something to this place that's given so much to me. And I think the same goes for every place I go. I just feel that the environment gives us so many resources, so many friendships, so many opportunities to learn about ourselves and, our place on the planet and what we can do as human beings to be better to it. And so I think I definitely see myself in conservation in the future too.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so since we are coming closer to the end, we have about 15 minutes left. So we have a round robin question, and then we'll have a couple of minutes open for anybody that has any questions about getting into conservation. So I will be starting with Katie. And the question is going to be, now that we've shared a bit about our experiences and our career path journeys, what do you see for the future of conservation on Kauai? And do you have any advice that you would share with the youth of Hawaii that want to get into conservation? So Katie, you're up first.
Well, I guess what we've been saying about do an internship and so on is a good way to start a conservation career, and come and volunteer. And anytime, we need all the volunteers we can get to tackle those weeds.
And what would you like to see for the future of conservation on Kauai?
Well, it's just wonderful how all the different organizations network and so on and help each other, and that's very important. And gosh, yeah, I want to thank everyone. We certainly enjoyed working with everyone over the years.
Mahalo, Katie. Same question for Randy, Lei, and Cassie. I'll start with Lei first. What would you like to see for the future of conservation on Kauai? And is there any advice you'd like to share with Hawaii youth wanting to get into conservation?
Oh, I'd like to see young and all ages be involved in conservation. It's how we'll keep this planet going, how we'll keep our islands going, and how we'll be the best humans we can be on this planet, because it is our home, and we got to take care of it. So I hope to see many more enthusiastic and excited individuals coming out and being a part of this career path in this field. It's what I heard today from many of us is it's surely a rewarding career choice, and one that makes you feel good at the end of the day. When we leave our jobs, all of us here, we get to feel really good about the work we're doing.
Mahalo, mahalo. Randy, so with your experience, and Cassie as well, in Kupu, do you have any advice to share with Hawaii youth wanting to get into conservation?
Uh, advice, I guess it was said already, but internships are always a great place to start. I mean, it sounds like I'm the Kupu spokesperson right now, but there's other internships out there too, like the PIPES program. But especially if you're just getting out of high school or you're 17 years or older, you can do the Hawaii Youth Conservation Corps, which is a summer program that goes to many different organizations on the island, and you get like a snapshot of what conservation looks like at different organizations. And Limuhuli is one of the host sites, so I get to meet a lot of those youth. And our last Kupu service member was a part of the previous year's Hawaii Youth Conservation Corps. So, and that's a super great experience too, because you get to work with a few other youth or peers, and you get to do a lot of camping. And yeah, I mean, I wish I could have done it, but that's a great place to start.
Mahalo, mahalo, Randy. Cassie, any advice you'd like to share?
Sure. I think that if you come across someone that's interested, or if like you're someone that's interested in conservation here, is just reach out to somebody, because the island's so small and this community is so small and everyone is so friendly that I've met, that if you reach out, then someone will know somebody else who can help you, or, you know, that everyone will find a way somehow to get more youth involved, or just people in general. They don't have to be youth, but just anyone who's interested in conservation involved. As long as you just, you know, email, like DM on Instagram, there's any way to connect. And people are super willing to take you out in the field and work with you, or just whatever.
Mahalo. Kyle, so I would like to ask you, since you've worked in conservation for about 17 years now, what would you like to see for the future of conservation on Kauai?
Yeah, thanks. I would like to see, you know, healthy native ecosystems, from the ocean up to the top of the mountain, and, you know, a community that really values and cares about it, which is there, but we just got to keep growing that. I think a really good example that I see on a daily basis is just like the nene goose, which we never really saw as kids. Now I see flocks of them flying like every day, which is pretty incredible. It's just something that used to be really rare. You know, the nene were on the brink of extinction is now a really common thing. You don't even think twice when you see them. And so hopefully it can be like that with a lot of other species. And you didn't actually ask me this, but I will just chime in on the for young people trying to get involved in conservation. Reflecting for me, like everything has kind of just, I've been fortunate that things have just fallen into place. But I do think that if you are a young person who wants to do this type of work, whether it's working for DLNR or NTBG or working at a fish pond or the lo'i, I think if you know you want to live on Kauai or you want to live in a certain place, I think it is good to think from a youngish age, maybe high school or college or a little after college, just to talk to people who are in those fields, and just to know like what jobs are available, what kind of money they make, what kind of advancement opportunities there are, just to be realistic about what's out there, because we all know that there's not a ton of jobs, there's not a ton of opportunities, but at the same time there are plenty, and you want to be able to kind of strategically get into those positions. I mean, for me, it's just kind of worked out, but yeah, it is good to, I think, kind of have a goal and a path as far as like what is actually out there on Kauai. Yeah. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that. Yeah.
Yes, we have just a comment before we move on to Bregan. Terry Sakai
Yes.
says, yes, waiting until the young people are graduating from high school is too late. We need to fill in the learning gaps way before that. Before we start funneling questions from other places, just one more. Bregan, do you have any advice for anybody wanting to do Kupu or to get into conservation?
I think everybody really highlighted what are good options for if you're interested, like a good stepping stone. And I mean, I still feel pretty young in my conservation career, so I'm still taking this day by day, but I think volunteering is a really big thing that you can do just to get experience, something hands-on, and you're going to be working with a bunch of people that you'll be surrounded by if you're in the field of conservation. So finding different nonprofits on island or wherever interests you and kind of reaching out and getting information, because people are always looking for volunteers. And I think that's a really good way to see if it's something that you actually would want to do as a career. And then I think finding mentors, like everybody was talking about as well, and leaning on them for support and asking advice is another thing that I would say has been really helpful for my path thus far.
Mahalo, Bregan. I'm just going to check in our chat, and we do have a question. So this is from Ronald Nagata. He says, as a Maui resident, is there any particular advice you might have for someone that's 33 and wanting to change careers beyond the volunteering and internship already mentioned? So if anyone would like to chime in on that, making a career change, that is a question from Ronald.
Oh, I have one. Yeah, you could just apply for whatever jobs are out there, entry-level positions, and see if they'll take you on. Because one of my older sister's classmates decided she wanted to do a career change, and I don't know if she's still into conservation. And she reached out to me. This was a couple years ago now, so she was probably in her early 30s as well, and she decided that she didn't want to go the internship route, and then she just applied for a position, entry-level position through RCUH, I believe, and they decided to pick her up even though she didn't have any experience. So that's always an option. You just apply and see if they'll hire you.
I want to add to Randy's comment too, and when you apply and should you get it, enthusiasm, attitude, and just good hard work and really putting your mind to it will get you very far along. And that's how you build yourself in the conservation field.
Yeah, if you have those things that Lei mentioned, then everyone that I've met is more than willing to teach you and help you catch up really quickly.
Mahalo, mahalo. And I think we have one more comment up here, question. This is also from Terry Sakai. How can we help expose or teach the young people about conservation in the future? Is it a thought to renew the outdoor education through DOE at the Discovery Center and or other sites? So Terry, just because I'm the outreach person and here on this meeting, we as outreach it's definitely important for us to get into public schools as well as charter schools, and to build connections with students is a really big passion for myself. I really want to emphasize that conservation is a viable career path, because even while I was attending KAPAʻA High School, I had no idea that conservation was a real career choice that I could go into that would be fulfilling as well. And I think that can be said for a lot of people who graduated from, public school in Kauai, especially 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So I think building connections and making those face-to-face relationships with students is a big thing. As far as renewing the outdoor education through DOE, I think that would be a better question for somebody in the DOE, but as outreach, we're always happy to start programs or to be guest speakers or to make connections with science classes and like high schoolers looking for internships, and sharing those connections. If there's anyone else that would like to join in on that, please go ahead and join as well.
I just will add that I see in the chat from Julia that there is a new teacher at the Discovery Center up in Kokei, Joel Kawate, which is cool. That's my brother's classmate. So yeah, I'm excited to hear that.
Awesome. So I'm just going to look to Kim and Julia and see if there's any questions on Facebook.
I have not seen any questions on Facebook.
Okay.
Me neither, but I also just want to scroll way up in the chat and I found a couple of comments that I just want to share with everyone. That Kyle made a comment, mahalo nui, Katie. You are incredible and have made such a huge difference. I think shout outs of acknowledgement are certainly important. And then I believe there was another one. A couple of questions have been answered in the chat. But there were a couple of other, and maybe I just missed them. Shout outs to Katie, and I just wanted to make sure Katie saw those and understood how much she is appreciated in all of her efforts over the many years.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, we're coming up on right on time for 5 p.m. So I just want to say a final mahalo to everybody for making it and sharing your mana'o with us. I hope that we can share this recording with high schoolers and students all across Kauai and across the islands, and hopefully it'll inspire them to look into career in conservation. So mahalo. We do have some links posted in the chat for anybody interested in internships. So we have listed the websites for Kupu, Hawaii Conservation Alliance Foundation, KAPAʻA, if you're interested in kind of archaeological work and conservation and restoration work, and as well as pipes. So mahalo again, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you all at our next Forest Friday in, I believe, 3 months. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be announcing that shortly. So mahalo.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. You're all amazing.